But more recent years, I would have said the majority of my clients are doing data governance because they've seen the value in it, not for regulatory reasons. And I've always felt you need a centralized team to support data governance, but I've never been a fan of data governance being only done by that central team, because it doesn't work. I mean, if organizations do AI governance without data governance team being involved, they're very much looking at, is it ethical to use the data for this? Have we sorted out any unconscious biases and those kind of things? And they're not saying, is this the right data to use? I have worked with a couple of areas where they've tried to put or have put privacy on the same as the data governance team. I don't think that works very well. I mean, our whole conversation, I think, gives all the reasons why. I think AI literacy needs to be rolled in with the data literacy. It should be data and AI literacy training, not teaching today about data and next week about AI. We need people to understand them together.
Hello and welcome to Enterprise Tech Talk podcast. I am your host, Saumitra Kalikar. Today, we are going to discuss a topic which many organizations have struggled with for a long time. And yet, in the age of artificial intelligence, this topic has never been so important and is now back on senior executive agenda. We are talking about data governance. We are going to focus on data governance in the age of artificial intelligence. And to help me unpack this important topic, I am joined today by Nicola Askham. Nicola is a well-recognized data governance advisor, a coach, a speaker, and a thought leader. And I know she's also an author, having recently published a book titled Effective Data Governance, Design a Framework that Works for Your Organization. So, Nicola, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Saumitra. It's lovely to be here.
So before we take a deep dive into our topic for today, I would love to spend some time to talk about your book, if that's okay. Firstly, congratulations for the book. Yeah, and look, over the years, you must have come across many data governance programs. Some of those might have been spectacularly successful. Some of them might have been or probably not that much or even failed. But throughout that experience, what were your key observations that potentially probably motivated you to write this book?
Oh, I think a lot of I think what prompted me to write the book is I feel like I've learned an awful lot over the years by not necessarily doing it right, which is I've made a lot of mistakes, particularly in the early part of my career. And I think it is the fact that I see people making the same mistakes time and time again. So it makes me feel a bit better that perhaps I wasn't being 100% stupid in the early years. It was just you do what seems the right thing to do for data governance, but it doesn't win people over. So I think it was, it was all these mistakes that I kept seeing people do. And you're just kind of thinking, and then you got the other end of the extreme where people think everything has to be perfect. We've got to have this very detailed, full framework for it to work. And actually, I think we just, I felt like people needed the tips and advice on this. This is going to be challenging because it's all about people, and we have to bring people with us to get them to care about their data. But it can be done and we don't need to complicate it. We can just do a nice, simple approach. And I think also there's this very natural tendency of how can I fast track it? Oh, I'll use a standard framework. Well, standard frameworks don't work. So you have to design your own. But if you've never done it before, how do you know where to start? So it was kind of all of those things that I was trying to address by writing a book that they gave people step by step what they need to know and what they need to do, but also what they shouldn't do. Because I've already made that mistake for them. They don't need to do that one.
Yeah. And what kind of maybe at a high level, what kind of patterns you were seeing across organizations where either people were doing something right or people were making mistakes?
Yeah, as you say, I mean, I think that's what I've been very conscious of. A friend said to me very early on in my career, "You're good at this, but you're not very good at explaining why you're good at it." And he said, "Watch what you do that works, and also watch what
Yeah.
other people do that works." So I don't have the monopoly on knowing how to do everything right for data governance.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I've worked in organizations and gone, wow. So, I mean, one thing is like conceptual data models. One of
Mm.
my first contract roles as an interim data governance manager, there was a firm of consultants doing some work for a bigger program that data governance was being delivered as part of. And he was kind of trying to tell me what he already knew. He was such a helpful chap. And he said, I'm running a conceptual data model workshop for this, I think it was finance. Do you want to come? And I kind of went, I felt like, well, that's what data modelers do. I'm a data governance person. But I went because he was really nice and he was really going out of his way to hand over all the knowledge that he'd acquired whilst being at this client, which, as you know, can be sometimes a little unusual in some consultants. And, honestly, it was the most amazing workshop. I suddenly saw how
Mm.
people were engaging with him. They were describing quite easily how they think about their data. And at the end, I just went, sorry, I'm new here, and I just wanted to ask a question. Is there any data here that you think you own?" And they went, "Well, what does that mean?" And I went, "Well, obviously, I've only just started, so but we'll get round to actually defining it properly. But is there any here that you don't want anybody else in the whole of the rest of this company making a decision on without asking you?" And they went, "Oh, yes." And they were almost like them volunteering to be data owner for certain data. And it was almost like Rob inviting me to this workshop had this huge light bulb moment for me. So I think, and I've been a bit like that, a collector all along, I worked out, don't do it this way, so I've got to find another way of doing it. And then I just saw what other people were doing and also across sectors as well. So in Europe, back a few years now, we had the Solvency II directive for all insurance companies, and as part of that, they had to do some data governance over their data. But there was a concept in that called materiality, which is basically put more effort into looking after the most material or most critical data um, that I've taken to every client and every sector ever since. So I think I've been a real collector over my career of kind of learning. You're suddenly going, oh yes, I can see why the regulators asked for that, and why should that only be for insurance companies? Surely that works for everybody. And it's
Yeah,
been
yeah.
great fun collecting all these things.
In Australia also there is something similar. There is a regulatory body for insurance and financial services in general called APRA, and they also have specific expectations like defining very clear information owners, for example, and define the materiality of different systems and services, etc. So, yeah, something similar. But
Mhm.
coming back to your book, of course, this is aimed for the data governance teams, of course, right? The data governance lead and the team underneath. But who else do you think within the business should read this book and they will get benefited?
I do think that anybody in like a wider data team, because
Mm.
you and I know the data governance team, I think of all the data teams has to work with everybody else. If we do our job well, we help everybody else do their jobs with data well, and the business people. But I can't see many business people just wanting to go and to read a book about data governance. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But I do think
Yes.
that the wider teams, the data architects, even the data and analytics teams, because I think a lot of people need to understand what it is that their
Mm.
organization is trying to do so that they can help, because all the other data teams, even when you come down to like the data security, cybersecurity teams, they can all benefit from having data governance. And I always feel that like data governance is the thing that joins up all the other data management disciplines
Yeah.
and makes it aligned. We make everybody aligned and easier so that it's a lot easier for everybody to actually do their work and do it well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's now move to our topic, and in a way, your book is timely because um, this this topic about data governance, I'm seeing at least within Australia, it is getting back into the senior executives kind of discussions. I'm sure it's the same for other places as well. Partly, it is also driven by the AI acceleration in AI investment, and we'll talk about that. But taking a step back, if you look at the way data governance used to happen, and it used to run, let's say 4 or 5 years back, or recently, some of those failed, right? Some of the data governance initiatives failed. There was a kind of expectation mismatch between what executives expected from this function and what they could deliver. So do you have any perspective as to what what didn't work well in the past, and why now it is coming back into the senior executives focus?
So that's a good question. I do think that in the past, I would say a lot of people only really got data governance initiatives going because there was a regulatory requirement. So financial services, pharmaceutical, things like that. And then in the UK and more recently, the higher education sector, the housing sector, they all just kind of add on kind of thing.
Mm.
And I think a lot of organizations did it only because they had to tick a box for the regulator. And I'm sure you've come across the same. You have the same conversations about what's the minimum I can do to keep the regulator off my back. And I felt like they were then not thinking big picture. And the silly
Yeah.
thing is, they were kind of going out of their way to do a tick box approach because they felt that would be quicker. But actually, it probably wasn't actually delivering much in the way of value and was probably harder work and more labor intensive. Whereas if you
Mm.
put a nice, simple, basic data governance foundation in, you'd meet the regulatory requirements really easily and
Mm.
actually start delivering some business value. And I think that's possibly what I've seen a lot is that people have seen it as something that the regulator asked for, not something that's had wider business benefit. And I've really enjoyed probably even I mean, there's always been the odd organization that's had that
Yes.
foresight and done it. But more recent years, I would have said the majority of my clients are doing data governance because they've seen the value in it, not for regulatory reasons. And that's a wonderful shift to have seen happen. But I think you're right, the AI is driving it a lot because people want AI and you know, even the companies that are perhaps slower to adopt it are suddenly realizing that they're just gonna not win the battle or survive the battle with their competitors if they don't embrace it. And then doesn't matter that, you know, some of us in the organization have probably been saying for years our data's, you know, important, we need it to be good enough. And it's not until they're doing these first trials of using Gen AI that they're realizing that the data's not good enough because you can have the cleverest AI engineers and write the wonderful LLMs, but if you train it on poor quality data, you're going to get the wrong answers. And I mean, I'm sure you've seen there's already been horror stories in the
Yeah.
news where people have
Absolutely.
rushed to do AI chatbots that have
Mm.
said the wrong things. So you know, I think it's been a very tangible thing that perhaps executives can get their heads around. I think when there
Yeah.
was some
Yeah.
data governance, in the early days, I would have called myself a data governance evangelist, and then I learned that's no good because that's just all about, well, our data must be perfect and we'll live happily ever
Yeah.
after. Like, oh, go
Yeah.
away, Nicola. Yes, that's just sort of, you know. Whereas
Yeah.
if saying, look, AI is really exciting, this is really great, but look what happens if you don't have the right data in there.
Absolutely.
I think we've
Gar-
given something really tangible to get their heads around. They want AI, and now they
yes.
understand that the data governance or good enough data for that AI is part of the package.
Yeah, yeah. As they say, garbage in, garbage out, and it's so true for in this area, right? And I was reading an article, I remember somewhere, where it said around 60 to 70% of organizations they feel that their acceleration of their AI ambitions is heavily constrained by the quality of data, and thereby by extension the data governance, the maturity of data governance within their organizations, right? And just to build on that, what you just said, in the in the past, I would imagine data governance heavily focused on what I would call as more structured, readily available data, like your how we can better govern it in terms of lineage, etc. Right, data quality, like your customer records and CRM systems and addresses and so on and so forth. Right, but everything is well structured. But come AI, and as Gen AI and agentic AI now
Mhm.
that's coming up, a lot of focus has shifted from not necessarily structured data, but now on unstructured data, like your emails and your all kind of conversations and everything. And historically, data governance probably didn't focus that area that much as against structured data. Is this a new area data governance now should increasingly focus on, in your view?
I think you're right, and I think it's happened only just a small number of times over my career where I've been helping somebody do data governance, and then somebody else in the organization says, "Oh, will you do like records management?" Which tends to include the unstructured data, like your emails and things. And we'd normally go, "Well, that's not data. Well, it is data, but it's, as you say, it's all over the place. We don't know what it is."
Yeah,
And you can't say, Sumitra, before you press send on that email to me, you must write all the metadata and tell me what everything means. And kind of send me links to your glossary about what every word you've used means, because that's crazy. So,
yeah,
I have seen some organizations where the data governance team has taken on records management, and I've been part of that in the past. Um, but I think there's still, it'd be interesting to see what you think, but I've still come across a lot of organizations where there has been no formal records management. So I think, um, I think you should say AI is absolutely driving the need for it, because there is probably the most amazing data and information and insights that could be got from looking at all our emails or our. I'm working with a retailer in the UK, and they have CCTV to try and look for shoplifters and things like that. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could actually monitor and see if we can predict?
yeah,
And we've got AI that can actually churn through all of that data way quicker than we ever could. Um, but we've got to find one way of doing it. So I think the principles are the same,
yeah,
but I think we have to you should say, take the right approach, because I think when it comes to unstructured data, it's all about tagging so that we can give the AI an idea of what it is, rather than the full definition that I'd want if I'm doing pure data governance at data field level. I want a proper definition of what does customer mean? How long is the customer name field, and what does this field mean, and what are the constraints about it? We can't do that with emails and documents,
yeah.
but we can do a tagging, say this is a kind of, and I think that's the kind of thing that we can use AI both to do the tagging, but we'll need some human in the loop in the early days. But then it can actually help us do the tagging and then to find that data again.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. So tagging it becomes more important, and and thereby the classification of data, like which data is more sensitive for your organizations versus public versus what, right? And so, and because when what AI has done in my view, it is Gen AI has democratized use of AI in a way that every user can independently now use AI for their own productivities. And if someone happens to upload business data onto a third party platform for some email summarization or word documents generation, whether that email is sensitive, whether that it has any encrypted or any sensitive information, that becomes an important consideration, right?
Me.
In the future, as organizations start rolling out more agentic AI, which are going to do work mostly autonomously, then and human in the loop, yes, would be there, but for day-to-day work it may not be there.
Mm.
And so how agents are going to, which what kind of data agents should have access to and what data they shouldn't have access to, etc., those would be in my view important considerations. And it will good to see whether data governance as a function uplifts itself to now start covering these aspects as well.
Oh,
Um,
definitely. I was at there's a masterclass I run regularly for a vendor in the UK, and the last one we did was on this whole topic. And honestly, the conversations were amazing. There were a lot of data governance teams that are literally their kind of organizations are going, oh, you can sort out. They've almost had the initial teething problems of using agents that are looking at the wrong data or bringing back the wrong answers, or the ones where it'll make up, if you ask it what the latest HR policy is, it can't find the answer to your question, so it makes it up for you. Kind of thing.
yeah,
They had like those
yes,
teething problems. And then somebody would turn up at their desk and go, "Oh, Samitri, you do data governance here. Can you sort out the AI data as well?" There's a lot of data governance people who, I think we've got the two sides. There are really excited that people actually are now asking them to come to the party and play,
yeah, yeah,
but there's other people that go, but we don't have the expertise for this yet. We're data governance people. So I think a lot of data governance people need to really get their heads around AI and
yeah,
understand how are we going to do data governance in a pragmatic way. I've always said we've got to do data governance in a pragmatic way, but we can't lock down everything. Our organizations are being more innovative than they've ever been, or quicker than they've ever been.
Mm.
And we're just going to be the bad guys if we go, stop, no, nobody build an agent, nobody do anything, and until we've made sure all the data's documented and perfect. So I think we've got to be very, I don't know, just practical and pragmatic in how we do it,
Mhm.
rather than let's lock everything down till all our data's perfect, because we know that's never going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. And that is a good point. And uh, building on that, the other thing I wanted to unpack with you was how data governance needs as a function needs to evolve or is evolving based on what how you're seeing across the organizations. Um, as the overall nuance about operating models also is changing, right? So in the past, when these functions were established, data governance, and I'm part of architecture strategy function, and I'm same for our function as well. Um, we had typically very rigid operating model within technology overall business, where these were centralized functions. Architecture is centralized function, data governance is a centralized function, right? And they would come up with the standards, policies, etc., and kind of do in a way governance gates for different types of changes within the organization. But now operating models within businesses are evolving. They are getting more product aligned, right? And they become more federated. What I mean by that is that um, the there are more autonomous independent teams now within organized product teams, which are end-to-end responsibility for designing products, building, maintaining products, etc. Part of that also, to a certain extent, being responsible for the data they are using, right? So in this federated and more product aligned operating models, which are becoming more and more common nowadays, how do you see data governance as a function evolving? Would it still continue to be some sort of centralized function, or do you see now it's kind of federated
Mhm.
across these teams?
So, no, that's a great question, and I think I've 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 always felt you need a centralized team to support data governance, but I've never been a fan of data governance being only done by that central team, because it doesn't work. I mean, as I say, you're a data architect, Sumitra. I think you're one of the people before data governance comes along. It's you and your team that know probably the most about overarching data across the organization, but you still wouldn't want to be accountable for the quality and the definitions of all of that data, even though you probably know more than most people at your organization. So I've always said that, yes, you should have a data governance team centrally. But actually, I've always been a fan of the federated approach.
Hmm,
I'm not been, a fan of one team can sit and do data governance for you and fix
hmm,
everything. I've always been about training up the team. So I think the principles of data governance have never really changed in the 24 years I've been doing it, but how we do it is what has evolved. And I think, particularly what you're saying with the data products and everything, I think I've been through some really interesting times with some clients, and they wanted to get rid of data owners and data stewards because we've got a data product owner, and
hmm,
we went through some really interesting discussions and debates while we were trying to work out what we felt would work and what we didn't. And in the end, we actually ended up still having data owners and data stewards, but you have a data product owner, because
hmm,
and that is a role that data governance didn't create.
hmm,
That's just the move creating data products created that role, but we give them some data governance responsibilities. So for making sure they use the right data, for going to the data owner and getting, agreement that they can use that data for that purpose and that it's
hmm,
good enough. And if it's not good enough, working with the data stewards to see what we could do. So I think I've always been a fan of this federated approach, but I think, and this will probably just change, because if we have business users able to build their own AI agents in the future, we
yes,
don't they don't even have a hat called a data product owner. So I think
yes,
it's just be getting almost like more and more people have more and more responsibilities. Um, when it comes to data governance. But I think we still need our data owner and data steward, because I had a really interesting conversation with a client where they were saying we didn't need a data owner. And I said, well, that's all right, as long as that data is only going to be used in one data product. So then
mm,
you can have the data product owner can own it.
mm,
But actually data product owners tend to be more junior. They're more data engineers, aren't they? They're bringing it
mm,
together, building it. They're not the business owners of that data.
mm.
So
Yeah,
it's been some really interesting and useful conversations and trialing while we've worked out what works and what doesn't. So I think you're right. I've always been a fan of federated, probably getting more people with just a little bit of a data governance responsibility added to their existing role.
yeah, yeah. Again, in Australia, there is if, under APRA regulations, particularly financial services, there is a role or concept defined as information owner. I don't know whether this is used in other areas like in UK, etc. But information owner is the kind of business owner, but more responsible for the data underneath, not the entire system. Um, so yeah, that's an interesting concept. But building on what you just said. Uh, I mean, yes, these things are still evolving a bit, but is there sufficient clarity as to what kind of roles should still be centralized? You talked about data stored, etc., and what roles are now emerging within the business or product teams, and more importantly, how they should interact in terms of roles and responsibilities.
Mm. So I think just the only people in the center should be the data governance team. And their role is to support all the other people, basically, to help them do their job, maybe do the data quality reporting and help them fix the issues. But I think the data owners and data stewards are out in the business, and they always should be, because it's the business units that understand, why do we have that data? What are we going to use it for? So I think very much but what they don't know, particularly in the early days, is they don't know how to do data governance. They don't understand why one minute they were a head of function and now somebody said you're also a data owner or an information owner, which is a term I see a lot used interchangeably. So I think, and I can't just come and meet you today and say, "Oh, it's lovely to meet you, Savitra. I think you're an information owner as well," and you go, "Oh yes, great. I understand exactly what I've got to do. Thanks, Nicola," and never talk to me again. So my job is now to liaise with you, to get you to committees, to do that oversight, make sure we're focusing on the right things and doing the right thing. Because I've always felt very strongly that it shouldn't be down to me either, if I'm your data governance lead, to say this is what we're going to prioritize next for data governance.
Mm,
It should be you. You're the business user that's doing this, and you know what the challenges are. You know if we're having a new system or we're developing AI agents or something. You should be saying, "We need to do data governance on this next. Please, can you help us, Nicola?" Not me coming and going, "Right, I need you to do this, this, and this." But I think in the early days, we have to do a lot more hand-holding and support of everybody.
mm,
So I do think a lot of what the data governance team is communications, training, briefing, and that means that we're even being responsible for what I consider the basic level of data literacy training. So I was doing that for years before data literacy even became a buzzword. I would just call it was part of the training as doing data governance. So I trained my data owners, I trained my data stewards, but actually I need everybody in the whole organization to start realizing that data is an asset and we need to manage it like we do our other assets. So I was trying to do little bits of training. I was trying to get in induction training. I would try and mention the importance of capturing data correctly in anybody's training that would let me. So, and I think it's, that's why as data governance people, we have to be really good communicators, because we're the ones responsible for supporting everybody in our whole organization. But I think you're right. Whereas up till a couple of years ago, we were perhaps doing, here's some basics. Data's an asset. You must look after it. Now we're going to be saying, and if you're using AI, make sure it's the right data. Is it good enough quality for you to use it? Are you allowed to use it for that? So it's almost like we need to build on the principles for everybody and train them. So I do see we're very much communicators and trainers sitting in the middle.
yeah, yeah, good point. One other thing, because we're talking about operating model, one other thing I really want to get your perspective on is is a is about AI governance, and as a function. Look,
Mm.
and what I've seen in few organizations, at least here in Australia, is with the of course in last 2 years with Gen AI and now agentic AI governance has started coming up as a has started popping up as a distinct function, maybe a small function, with initial responsibilities to define some AI policies, principles, etc. Some organizations stood it up as a separate, completely siloed um, function within potentially some business areas, and they had similar responsibilities to coordinate with rest of the organization purely from AI policies perspective, etc., principles perspective. But in some other organizations, also seen gradually, they are bringing data governance and AI governance closer together under a single bigger, broader business function. Not necessarily merging them together, but under the same operating function, with some clear role, distinct responsibilities assigned to those. I wanted to get your perspective on this as to how you are seeing this now evolving um, across industries, because I don't
Mm.
see, at least in Australia, we have landed on a definitive answer whether data governance and AI governance should be under single operating function, or they are very distinct.
Yeah, I think I've my experience has been very similar to yours. And say I mentioned earlier the day I was at recently, where some really interesting conversations with people, and I think even in the UK we're getting the same mix.
Mm,
Um, that some people are saying, "Well, somebody's got to govern this AI thing, and you already do governance. Can you do it?" Versus they're setting up specialist teams, some of which are refusing to talk to the data governance people because they're going, "No, no, no, you do data, we do AI." And then you have got that hybrid where people are saying, "We are separate, but we understand that we absolutely have to be aligned and work together." And I think also we don't want the middle one, but having them separate or combined is okay. But I think, either way, we've got to work very closely together. But I think the conversations I'm seeing is that if organizations do AI governance without data governance team being
mm,
involved, they're very much looking at, is it ethical to use the data for this? Have we sorted out any unconscious biases and those kind of things? Um, and they're not saying, "Is this the right data to use? Is it good
mm,
enough to use for this?" But I think also that, I was talked to data governance teams who have had AI governance added to their thing,
mm,
um, but they haven't been given any more resources and they haven't been given the training, and they're feeling really out of their depth about how do I do this bias thing and how do I make sure this is the right model? How do you do model governance if you've never done anything like that? So I think I don't feel too strongly from the conversation I've had whether you should have them on the same team or separate, but I do think we need good training. And I think even if you've got a separate AI governance team, I think it would be absolutely wonderful if the data governance team got some training because
mm.
that will then help them work with the AI governance team to work on how do we do data governance for AI that actually is a practical, useful approach,
Mm.
is the best way to do it. So, I mean, when I was saying that, I just had a huge flashback to years ago when I was working in a bank, which is where I first ever did data governance. But I joined their corporate banking, and because corporate banking looks after massive organizations who use loads of different services. And so when you were new into the department for the first few months, you could go and spend half a day a week with all the different people that provided services to corporate customers. And I took advantage of that. And it was brilliant because that meant I understood. So if a customer said, I need to talk about treasury and doing derivatives or something, I'd be going, oh, I know the person and I know what you're talking about rather than I have no idea what you're talking about. Let me go find something. And I think that's almost what we need for our data governance people. If they're not doing AI governance, we don't need to be experts, but we do need to have a basic understanding of what's going on so that we can design data governance and work with them well. Because, we said earlier, this isn't about stopping things and stifling innovation. This is almost about enabling safe innovation.
Absolutely, and that's the really important wording there. And the reason why I asked this question, I actually brought it up, was based on my own experience, and something which I'm seeing more and more as a kind of frustration coming from business teams, where um, when business wants to roll out a new initiative, an idea, right, a change, um, you already had so many governance gates. You had architecture governance, you have data governance. Now you have, now all of a sudden people are talking about AI governance, and in some areas there are overlaps of information business need to share with all the through all these governance forums, and same repetitive questions are being asked, right? And if you think yours from a business owner perspective, it's a it's a frustration, it's a nuance, right? And it just delays the initiative. So that fundamentally raises the question as to how you can optimize this whole the initiative or work delivery model, where these governance models do not necessarily just create a rate for the sake of them, but you can optimize and automate them if possible, so that one set of questions are asked across these forums, and as much as possible common decisions are made, right?
Mhm.
And I'm not saying we have answer on this, but I'm just stating out that these are practical problems emerging which we need to have answers on.
Oh, I totally agree. And actually, what I would say is, I think one of my clients was done the best that I've seen in this space. Exactly what you were saying. The data protection team had a long checklist. The data governance team had a long. I think theirs was called the data governance assessment. Then you had the records management people talking about data retention periods. Then you had the data security, cyber security, and
Mhm.
so as you say, a lot of the questions were hard work. So when we first started helping them, they were trying to pull them together, but they didn't really have the manpower. So that was something that myself and one of my associates started helping with, and it. I think the way you just described it, Sumitra, was really exactly how it was. It's really hard work because you, as a data architect, have asked a similar question to me as a data governance person, but you've asked it for a different reason.
Yeah,
And so
so,
to actually everybody wanted, I mean, all the teams there, all the different teams worked very well together at that particular organization. And they all wanted the same thing, but I won't pretend it was easy that we all said, oh, let's just combine these and here it is, go. Because what we had to do was almost like put everything into one document and then suddenly say, oh, well, I think those three questions all mean the same. And then we'd go, right, so we're proposing that we ask this question. And then because the data protection officer would go, well, no, I won't get exactly what I need. We need to ask it like this. So there was a lot of toing and froing, but we did. And I think to begin with, the first checklist was like 100 questions long. And that you can, yes, it's, we can say it's okay, business user, it's all in one checklist now, but I mean, 100, who's going to want to do that? They're going to be trying to bypass us all. So
absolutely.
they worked together to bring them together and also work out what were supplementary questions that would only be answered if you answered this to question 7 or something.
Mm.
So they were working, took a lot of effort. I won't pretend it was easy, but I do think it was valuable and the business users appreciated what they were trying to do. And I know what they're currently working on is they haven't got a fancy tool to do it, but they do use Power Automate and their
Mm.
Power Apps.
Yeah, yeah,
So what they're trying to do, so without using a big expensive tool or something, is do it so that you get the checklist and you, as a business user, you might only get 15 questions. You answer them, and depending on what you answer, it might send you more questions back, but it might send your answers off to a different team to
yeah,
review and ask whether something. So they're trying to make it as frictionless as possible. But it's taken a lot of hard work. But I think you're right because your data architecture gateways, the data security people, we all ask these questions for genuinely good
good.
reasons. But what we've got to do is make it, I suppose, as less painful as possible for our business users. Otherwise, they will just try and avoid us. And then we carry
Yeah,
on making the mistakes of the past.
yeah, absolutely. And people will try to find workarounds if they find that it's so difficult and challenging just to get their small, even the small initiatives through the whole work delivery processes, right? Um, yeah, and just to extend that now to the future of the AI, future AI work and the AI world, where um, we will very soon start seeing industrialization of AI, where there are more and more AI agents and agentic solutions being designed and implemented, which has started happening, and where agents start delivering more autonomously the end-to-end workflows, right? There, the question starts becoming as to what is the role for these governance forums? And not, I'm actually making it much broader for question, not only limited to data governance, but AI governance or architecture governance or others, where businesses want to come up with the idea. AI helps them to accelerate that idea quickly and to deliver them that much faster, right? With code generation and everything, etc. And now you have started seeing AI models which can do potentially even independent, autonomous security reviews, etc. of the code, right? Which means that, and the expectation is that governance needs to start becoming much more automated and part of the workflow, as right, work delivery, part of the CI/CD process itself as much as possible, right? And how do you see the data governance in this context, or AI governance as well, if you want to provide a view on that, needs to evolve so that these things become much more automated, all these governance, audits, and decision making processes?
So I think that perhaps the big, perhaps it's not a change as such, but perhaps something we need to become more mature in is this risk assessment. So I've always said that looking at risks to data and the controls around it that we put in to mitigate those are part of data governance, but there tend to be things that I only see organizations that have been doing data governance a long time, so are really mature, or are doing it often for regulatory requirements because the regulator has asked them to look at risks and controls. But I think that's how we're going to strike this balance that you're talking about between how can we automate? Because if we automate, there's gonna be some risk.
Hmm.
And I think whereas, in the past, we might just say, "Oh, well, we've got to do this." I think we're gonna have to perhaps make sure that particularly our data governance forums, which are usually made up of business people with a few others like the data governance team and like yourself, I would always invite along to advise people. But I think they're gonna have to set risk appetites. I think risk appetite has traditionally been set only by risk teams, but I think the business users have to start, or like the data owners, the data stewards, start having some input into that to say, because there's going to be some things that it's absolutely okay to automate. And I think I like to simplify everything. So I always go, let's simplify it. Let's automate the boring stuff. And anything that needs human consideration, let's automate it. And I think what we have to do is get people understanding that as part of that, perhaps those governance forums, is to look at the risk. Is it
Hmm.
acceptable that we do this? I mean, I think back to my very, very early days on the bank that I worked at for many years, and when I was in a branch, uh, I was with the people who would say, I mean, it shows you how long ago checks were wholesale, but, they'd be walking around with checks going, "Oh, Saumitra hasn't got enough money in his account, but let me have a look. Oh, no, this is the first time this has ever happened, and it looks like some money that normally comes in hasn't come. That looks like a genuine mistake. Shall I ring Saumitra up and ask?" And you go, "Yes, I'm so sorry. My employer had a problem. The money's coming in later today." And they go, "It's fine. We won't bounce your checks, Saumitra." Um, and it was all heavily manual. Notes would be written up to say, "I've spoken to Mitra, nice chap, genuine in mistake," kind of thing. These days, that is all automated. Nobody looks at it to say we're bouncing your direct debit, or it's a computer
Hmm.
that happens. And I get, well, because I'm, you know, I don't like doing things wrong. Every month, I get a text to tell me that my account's going overdrawn, and every month I panic and open up my banking app to realize that it takes all the debits out before it counts the credit. So when my salary comes in, but so does the mortgage and all the other bills go out. It takes out all the debits, sends the text, puts the credit in. And this is all happening in the middle of the night, so by the time I check, my bank account's in credit, and I just go, and you go, "Honestly," but that is, they know that that happens, and they look and they don't bounce anything, but they've tweaked that over the years to go from being heavily manual to we look at things, but that does mean that they do bounce and stop payments for a lot more people than they ever used to, because
Yeah,
there's no human element, but they've decided the risk of that's worth it. It's worth
yeah, yeah,
balancing the reputation to the overhead, that we'd rather go, but, and I think we've got to do that with all of our data and go through that process, but much quicker than the banks did from
yeah,
moving to that being manual. We've got to start, we can't go, once a month and go, "Right, so we're thinking about using AI for this." So we need people
yeah,
to say how and it might well be using the classifications. We've got the data security ones. We know if it's personal data that we need to be careful for. And perhaps now we use our materiality or criticality from data governance. And perhaps we start using an amalgamation of it to say,
Mm.
if all of this data is critical and sensitive, it must have a human in the loop. But if it's all low, we don't care. We'll take the gamble. And I think
Yeah,
that's where we have a lot more humans setting the risk appetite for
yeah,
things.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. And part of that also is being clear about the responsibility and accountability for data governance function. And I wanted to quickly check with you one specific responsibility or scope question for data governance function. Um, when it comes to, we talked about AI governance, but when it comes to security governance and privacy governance, right? That is another topic we didn't discuss. But um, based on your experience, I get the security governance is much more specialized and there are security teams, but privacy governance, have you seen that as a separate function within organizations, or uh, it's kind of part of the broader data governance function as well?
So I have worked with a couple of areas where they've tried to put or have put privacy on the same as the data governance team. I don't think that works very well
Mhm.
because data privacy is much more than data governance. I always say that as data governance people, we help the data
Mm.
privacy teams meet some of their regulatory requirements, but we don't do everything, and they do a lot more of the legal side of things and what's the legal rationale that we have for using this data, and the privacy policies and consents. And it's another area of expertise. I data governance is over way more data than personal data. It's over any data that's useful to have it over.
Yeah,
So I think generally in my experience, they're done better being done by separate teams because
yeah,
we're coming at it from slightly different angles, but you do need to work closely together because
yeah,
otherwise you're going to be duplicating effort or even worse, having a gap because I think you're doing it. You think I'm doing like
yeah,
the data lineage. We
yeah,
both want data lineage for personal data, but I think you're doing it because you're the data privacy team. And I think, you think I'm doing it because I'm the data governance team. So I think we've got to be very closely aligned. But I have not seen it work very well when it's done by one team.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, you are right, and I have seen mostly privacy teams being separate. But it brings us to the same question we discussed earlier as to the more governance forums, and we have that more overhead from business perspective, because um, the questions around data residency and etc. Of course, privacy teams will be more interested, but maybe data governance teams also ask where your data is hosted, right? What kind of data is hosted? Is it sensitive data that is being hosted offshore? Those kind of questions, data governance team may be interested as well.
Mm. So I think, yeah, and I have seen a number of organizations where they have like one governance forum, particularly from like privacy and security and data governance I've seen put together. Um, because it's for like the business, the data owners, the information owners to be making decisions on. And they can work well as long as you manage the agendas well and agree who's like chairing it. Because I have seen another one where I get it. The business users don't want to spend all their life in meetings. We don't want to spend all our life in meetings. So we combine the forums to make one. But then I did work with one where the data protection officer decided they wanted to chair it.
Hmm.
But then three-quarters of the agenda was about data privacy. Then there was some data security decisions, and then we'd always go, "Oh, sorry, ran out of time for data governance." And we're going,
Hmm.
"Hang on, we were supposed to be merging, not just abandoning our stuff." So I think we've got to find clever ways of doing it. But I think this is where we can use we need to really work hard and getting our data
Yeah.
owners or information owners to understand what they can and can't make decisions on outside of these forums. We've got to try and keep things moving so it's just little and often so it doesn't feel like a big onerous thing, and then work out what are the things that are wide impacting, need a big debate with perhaps experts like yourself and me also at the meeting.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Look, I'm a bit conscious of time now, Nicola. But a couple of quick questions before we wrap it up. One was around the cultural aspects and what role data governance can play, all right, and what you are seeing now data governance playing in terms of increasing the data and AI literacy within the organization, not limiting to their team, but the wider business area, etc. Do you see data governance teams taking more proactively more responsibilities in this area?
Definitely. I think that's coming quite. I think to begin with, I felt like I kept having to keep remind clients I'm working with that that was something they had to do. Whereas now people are saying, right, we're going to do data literacy. Could you help us or whatever? So I think that's definitely something that's being driven by the data governance teams more and more. And interestingly, I do think, and I think, I mean, our whole conversation, I think, it gives all the reasons why. I think AI literacy needs to be rolled in with the data literacy. It should be data and AI literacy training, not teaching today about data and next week about AI. We need people to understand them together. And I was working with a consultancy to do some data literacy training for an organization last year. And we went to meet the team to do some brainstorming. And we got to the end of it. And the CDO suddenly went, oh, actually, one more thing. We've just started working on our AI governance policy, and it's going to take weeks or months to get it into place. But we don't want to miss this opportunity to mention it. And so we didn't have loads in the data literacy program because they felt that they didn't know what their organization's stance was going to be on it. But we were trying to think of how can we get people to understand how important data is when it comes to AI. And we just came up with the really simple analogy of, when GPS and sat nav first came out, and there was all the horror stories. Actually, there was one in the UK even last week of somebody an Amazon delivery van ended up in the estuary with water. The tide came in around it. So they do still happen where people just, we know we don't blindly follow what our sat nav or GPS says. Because if the map's updated or something, and you haven't updated your device, you could end up driving off a cliff into a river, into the sea, whatever. So we know we shouldn't blindly follow our sat navs, and we need to be the same with our data and AI. We shouldn't be blindly following them. We need to be thinking about, is this the right thing? Is this the right data? So, but I think you're right. I think the two need to be together. And even it doesn't matter if you're the most junior person in the organization. I think everybody needs some basic data and AI literacy training now.
Yeah, yeah. Probably one last question. This is more about how to effectively measure the success of this function, data governance function. And the point you may mention earlier, which is really great, is we shouldn't be looking this as a just compliance check, but a real business value enabler, right? But the fact, but what it means that then you need to articulate to executives as to how you are going to measure the success of this function when you start talking about business value. What kind of KPIs or metrics that you think
Yes.
are important, which data governance teams, anyone listening to this podcast should.
Yeah. I wish I knew the answer to this one. In 24 years, I still haven't worked it out. Because I think that the trouble is, we are going to solve problems by doing data governance at your organization. But it's almost like until I start doing it, I don't know what the problems are. So I can't tell you what to go and measure. And I think this is the real trouble. And the longer we've been doing it, it gets even harder because we go from fixing historic mistakes to preventing them happening in the future, which is it's exactly like data architecture, isn't it? We start getting the data architecture right, and then things just work. And then people go, oh, we don't need you anymore. And then things go wrong. And I think that's exactly where we are. So it is really hard to measure. I tell people one of the earliest things you should do in your data governance initiative is to launch a data quality issue resolution process, because there's no KPIs that I can tell you other than ones that measure the progress of implementing data governance, which doesn't actually show you the value of implementing it. It just shows you I've found 10 data owners, I've got, I know, 300 data definitions in my catalog. That's not showing value. That's just showing progress in actually implementing it. So we need to find real problems and fix them so we can say, it was taking Saumitra 2 hours every week to do this particular process because the data was always late or it was rubbish. You had to fix it, find some missing data. So we literally have to start saying that, or then breaking down, what's your grade? What's the average salary for your grade? Well, this is how much it's costing us per week in inefficiencies, or the reputational damage, the number of customer complaints. So we've always it's I've not found, and I've asked so many different people and worked with different people over the years. Here, I can't say here's a set of 3 KPIs, they're the perfect ones, but we need to really just get out there and solve some problems so that we can shout about it and prove that this isn't just Nicola with her rose-tinted spectacles on going, oh, we'll make things better. We will make things better. We must make things better. And we can shout about what we've done, whether that's time, money, but we need to actually explain that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So as we wrap up, Nicola, do you have any last kind of parting advice to senior leaders, anyone listening to this podcast, who understand that they need to uplift data governance function within their business, but potentially do not know where to start or how to approach that?
Oh, so I would say, I think if you don't know where to start, if you haven't got a clear burning issue that you want to start, I think you've got to take a step back and work out what are the drivers for your organization doing data governance. And the drivers are not to have better quality data. Okay, if the answer makes you go, so what? It's not the right answer. So we've got to think about, why does our organization need data governance? So I often say, look at your corporate strategy. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to reduce costs? Well, we can definitely help with that, because we'll find all these manual workarounds that are happening because the data's not good enough or the data's being fixed. So you've got to work out, why are we doing it? Have we got a new data platform being built and we want to make sure the data's good enough? Do we have a known issue with something that, perhaps we are a regulated area and our regulator's not happy with the quality of the reports we're sending in, and that's common. But, let's find that, because that's what you need to start on. I think definitely a mistake I made in the early days, and I see so many people make it. We go, oh, well, Saumitra's a nice chap and he thinks data governance is good. I'm going to go and help him. And you're great. You're easy to work with. We do it, but nobody else cares. So we need to find the things that business people will understand and get their head around and go, wow, that team was wasting, 30% of their time on manual workarounds because the data wasn't right in the system, and they were, exporting it, putting it into an Excel spreadsheet, adding more data and all the kind of things we know people do. So we need to kind of make it real for people, not this, oh, we'll all have lovely data and live happily ever after, which is what I sadly did in the early days. We've got to make it very practical and understand, what is it? What are the real benefits? What are the real problems you're going to solve? And focus on them first, rather than doing it for best practice reasons.
Yeah. Nicola, thank you. This was really a grounded, practical, and I'm sure mostly relevant conversation to the challenges organizations and business are facing today, particularly in this AI age. So thanks again. And to listeners, I would also strongly advise to have a look and buy the book from Nicola. It's definitely a very structured, practical guide as to how you should be designing a data governance framework, which is much more tailored to your organization. So Nicola, thank you. It was a pleasure hosting you. If you found this discussion valuable, please follow and subscribe to Enterprise Tech Talk. And thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.